first of all, thank you for doing this. I know we've met before. We've sort of discussed this issue, and this is sort of this is the hill I'm dying on, is the free expression hill. So it's I'm glad you're partaking in it. But free expression came up during the BC debate, which I think went well. It was the most requested topic out of the 42 EDAs, and then 63% of viewers voted for it as the most important topic. So there's something going on here, right? It could be because of what's happening with the climate, but I've always sort of thought this is an issue that's a winnable issue. So I think it's important to hear from everyone. So if you're all right for me to just jump right in.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome. So, you have a platform and a policy on free expression. Now, why do you feel free expression is such an important and prominent topic right now?
Because freedom of speech and cancel culture and all these things are making it hard for conservative voices to be heard, nowhere more so at university campus. But even within, newspaper publications, we saw a major resignation from the New York Times based on it in the last couple of weeks. And what's interesting, Angelo, I've been talking about this for several years. And in fact, when I launched my campaign in January and said I wanted to stand up to cancel culture and the erosion of our history, and the media mocked me for that. And now a few weeks ago, J.K. Rowling, Malcolm Gladwell, 150 prominent authors all signed a letter saying we need to fight back against cancel culture. So same thing, first free speech club I ever met with was years ago at UBC. And so the very fact that we have to have clubs to advance this shows that there's been an erosion over the last, I would say, few decades, but acutely in the last 5 years or so. And so I think thanks to you guys for stepping up for this important right.
Yeah. Well, it's a big battle. A question I wanted to ask you was, is this a conservative issue exclusively? I mean, you mentioned J.K. Rowling and Atwood. I mean, it seems as though, there are liberals, people who are intellectually liberal, who agree on this. It seems as though, free expression is such a basic human right that I feel like the majority of the public probably agrees with us. It's just that everyone's so afraid to say so. Do you think that this is just a conservative issue?
No, but I think, that old sort of poem or story, first they came for the Jews and I didn't say anything. Then they came for another group. Then they came for another group and I didn't say, then they came for me. I think this is an area where in the last number of years, there's been anti-Semitism through BDS and a whole range of things trying to silence Israel and Jewish voices, conservative voices as well. The attack that if we have a different point of view on Roxham Road, we are racist, right? And that, so I think it's a conservative issue in that we are at the slippery edge of the wedge where we are having our free speech rights attacked first. But I do think, as you said, that cross-section of authors, most were probably left or center left, but they see that same sort of erosion. First, they came for the conservatives, and then they're going to come for every other issue. And J.K. Rowling's case, you've probably followed it, has been off and on over the last year and a half because of her concerns about the intersection between transgendered rights and women's rights. And I think she has the right to stand up with her concerns about women's rights. And, of course, some voices on the left, if you even dare say something, they want to cancel you. So I think while it's a conservative issue right now, I think a lot of people that see the risk of a continued slide in the free speech right see that it'll eventually be mob mentality justice and everyone could be caught in it.
Yeah, and it is incredibly politicized, right? I mean, there is a double standard where you look at what happened with Stockwell Day, for example, or really any sort of conservative that has to step back, but it's not the same for the other side, right? I mean, you mentioned a little bit of this in the debate, but would you agree that this is just a massive double standard politically? It's weaponized.
Oh, 100%. We saw that at the Lindsay Shepherd case, at Laurier a few years ago, which I found very interesting because I actually watched that agenda. Steve Paikin is a journalist, I think is probably the most balanced journalist in Canada. And he had Jordan Peterson on. It was a good debate. I happened to watch it that night, and I'm not always watching the agenda, and I thought, wow, that was a really good debate. It was the first time I'd really seen Dr. Peterson. I'd heard of him, but that he grew to prominence. So to think she shows a debate on a on a university campus and is essentially run out of Dodge for challenging her students to watch a debate and come to their own conclusions. My goodness, Laurier is a good school. I've known a lot of graduates. When I was at P&G, we hired a lot from Laurier, and my goodness, it's the coddling of the young mind that I think anybody, regardless of political perspective, should never have that. We're in this sort of grievance culture era where you can't even be exposed to debate. And that was a fairly rational debate on the agenda. So this is why I've been speaking about it for several years, Angelo. And I do think we need someone who's principled, consistent, and can fight back. And in this race, several of the other candidates are now talking about it, but who's actually gone on university campuses to debate it? I'm the only one. I went on university campus a few years ago to debate the merit of Sir John A. Macdonald statues. My staff thought I would never come back alive from that debate. And I go to debates, I'm respectful, but I'm informed, and I win.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You do have a history of engaging, and it's great to see these policy points that have come out. If we can talk about that, you just announced two major policies regarding freedom of expression. One is related to universities, the other is related to media. Could you lay those out for us?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've talked a lot about this, and our team hadn't had the policies totally developed for when we launched our platform, because we have been looking to see how the University of Chicago's principles of free expression could be used here. And so we launched the policy, and I said, look, safeguarding free speech rights is also safeguarding all of our rights, because if that one erodes, other rights, whether it's conscience protections or others, are at risk. So the two parts of it will be federal funding of universities by the federal government will be contingent on their adherence to principles as those that are articulated by the University of Chicago. It is being used by some universities in the U.S., and I think it's an important element of defending higher learning and the need for us to ensure that people are receiving all viewpoints in their education, not an indoctrination. They need an education, and that means we're going to require that for federal funding for special programs. Universities are in the provincial sphere, except for mine. I went to Royal Military College, the only federal university. But other than that, I want this to be a positive incentive for universities to do what many other boards of governors are looking at but are scared to. Now it will tie a funding requirement. And universities, I've been talking to my own, they're hurting because of the lack of foreign students, lower enrollment because of COVID. So hopefully it will serve as a positive incentive for them to take freedom of expression seriously. The second principle relates to the press gallery in Ottawa, which really hasn't had an update since the reporters probably smoked cigarettes as they typed their stories on the typewriter. It is an old club, and it's not open to conservative voices or even online voices. Even their applications don't anticipate bloggers and online. I want to make sure full access to parliamentary press gallery resources available to anybody covering Parliament, including conservative voices. And I'm going to accredit the Independent Press Gallery of Canada, which was recently established because of the feeling that there has been an exclusion of conservative voices, of online, of new media. So I think, sunshine is the best disinfectant. Why would the press gallery not want as many voices as possible to cover our robust democracy? So I'm very proud of the policies. We've gotten good feedback. And as Prime Minister, I will implement them.
Yeah, well, I mean, I could tell you I'm pretty over the moon regarding the Chicago Principles policy. And for those wondering, it's not that, they hear Chicago, oh, American. We're not saying that we're adopting some kind of First Amendment, but the University of Chicago created a mandate that is so basic and universal that other schools have adopted it. And, in many ways, it's not that you're forcing schools, but in many ways, incentivizing schools to adopt the Chicago Principles effectively ends a major part of the culture war on campuses because, we right now at the Free Speech Club are taking UBC to the Supreme Court because they now have a new mandate which says, look, if you bring controversial speakers that groups like Antifa or activists are upset with, we're just going to cancel the event. It's a public institution. We're all funding this, right? If it's a private venue, then they can do whatever they want. But this is a major, major issue. So I'm really, really glad to see you're addressing that. I mean, why do you feel, free expression should be, the nexus of free expression should be on the Canadian campus?
Well, because it used to be, right? This is what is lost in, I'd say, the younger subset of associate professors and folks like this who've come up as part of this sort of coddled generation. I include some of my own, generation, Gen Xers in that. They seem to forget that the fundamental element of university education, particularly, is to challenge viewpoints, to encourage debate. And the very fact that the concept of tenure for university professors is in place was an expression of the freedom of expression and research interests for professors. In fact, why is there tenure? It's part of that freedom, academic freedom, that used to be a fundamental pillar of higher education. And now that seems to be kind of tossed aside. And thank goodness there's tenure, or, there would have been these groups taking runs at Dr. Peterson or other voices. They could do that to Lindsay Shepherd because she was just a TA, right? And so I hope people realize this is a back to basics. University of Chicago is a very well-regarded school. And as you said, it is an American example, but I went to Dalhousie Law School. It was the first modern law school in Canada. And what did it pattern its case law method after? Harvard. So even some of our universities have adopted educational sort of fundamentals from schools of higher learning, whether it's Oxford, Harvard. And I think what the University of Chicago has done is continuing to cause positive discussions on campus. And I want to see that happen in Canada.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, when we're talking about discussions and allowing conservatives and debate, we're not talking about hate speech, right? A lot of people will look at, a lot of people in the opposition will look at anything related to free expression and they think, oh, they just want to platform hate speech. We're not talking about that. You're not allowed to incite hatred or call to action or any of that in Canada. I think we're all on the same page with that, but debate is very important. When you look at what's happening abroad, especially with China, with Hong Kong and the Uyghur population, do you feel that our freedoms are delicate here? And do you feel that we need to do something to promote freedom elsewhere?
Yes, I do think one thing we can never be certain of, Angelo, is there are foreign influence operations in Canada now. I've talked a lot about the United Front, which are communist-inspired agents building sympathetic connections. It's been shameful to basically see the ties with the Liberal Party and the basic dictatorship, his admiration for it with Trudeau. But Russia, social media sources, there are efforts to influence our speech in Canada. And I've long said that some of the cancel culture and the division that's put out there, including some of the origins of Antifa support, comes from radical regimes and dictatorships that want to actually squelch voices that call out the situation with the Uyghurs in China, or the erosion of rights under the one country, two systems agreement with Hong Kong. So this is why we have to be more resolute in defending free speech, is there are not only the cancel culture sort of left voices trying to silence conservative ideas or independent thinking, there are also foreign interests that are trying to squelch examination of Canada being critical of the Communist Party in Beijing, these sorts of things. So we have to be not just aware of that, we have to fight against it. And so I think all of this discussion globally now about cancel culture is very good, because I'm hoping it leads to a rejuvenation of free speech as a fundamental pillar of a democratic society.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. It's an important issue, especially as it relates to what's going on with the Uyghur population. I know you're a busy guy, so I'm going to leave you with a final question here. I know you're a father, so this issue matters to you. Your kids are going to go to university one day. What message of hope or motivation would you give to a young conservative who's in university, who's entering the workforce, and feels afraid to speak their mind?
I always, I talk to my children every night before they go to bed, and I always try and encourage them to believe in themselves. And if you believe in yourself and have that confidence in yourself, that means you should fight back against people trying to silence your point of view, whether it's political, whether it's social, whether it's other. We should actually hope that young people would respectfully debate their points of view. And that's what I want to see in my children. And in fact, why I liked meeting with some of the UBC Freedom of Speech Club members years ago was, in many ways, it's harder to swim against the current. A lot of people will just give in and let the current take them and be quiet and just find themselves a lot further downriver and then have to get out and find their way back.
Oh, I know.
It takes courage. It takes resolve to swim against the current. But you know what? It makes you stronger. The more you are challenged, the more you are certain of the principles you're fighting for. So I always like people that are nudging their way against that current. And I think the good thing is some of the work you guys are doing is now being noticed. And I think more Canadians are aware of the risk to free speech protections in Canada than even 4 or 5 years ago. So keep doing what you're doing. That's what I would say to my own children. Now, my daughter's just starting high school, although she faced it as when the students were doing walkouts against the Ford government. I'm friends with Premier Ford and Stephen Lecce and the ministers here. And my daughter stayed in the school and was basically bullied for not being part of what was supposed to be a spontaneous walkout, but it was basically orchestrated by the teachers. And I was proud of her, not because she made a scene or was combative, that she was willing to be able to resist the peer pressure of just going out. And it's tough. So I have admiration. It will make all of your members stronger for standing up in what you believe in.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very inspirational, right? That's why I commend you for what you're doing regarding this policy. People see it and they realize it's okay. And we're allowed to be conservative. We're allowed to be principled. And it's great to hear your daughter is following your footsteps by being principled there. So thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it. Good luck in the race. And remember, all ballots have to be in by the 21st of August. Most people should have their ballots by now. If not, contact the party. And with that said, thank you very much, Mr. O'Toole.
Thank you, Angelo. Thank the whole club for what you do. And I look forward to getting back out to BC and perhaps speaking with your club in person. And heck, we may even have to run through some protests to do so. And I'll be willing to do that.
Absolutely. I look forward to it.
Okay. Take care. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.